Thank you. Okay. So my company is Stepping Stool Coaching, and the reason that it's a stepping stool and what I hope will be today is that we're all on our own journeys, and we prefer when we can step up to the sink and reach the faucet ourselves, just like when we were children. And the step stool is just a means for doing that. And coaching, in my view and in my approach, is that step stool that helps people just step a little bit higher than where they could reach on their own. As one of my clients called it, spotting, when you have a heavy lift and you just have that spotter to help make sure that you can do it safely. That's kind of where I'm coming from. And most of what I talk about today, I think everything is really something you already know somewhere. You've experienced it, you've seen it, the wisdom's there. You may not have thought about it explicitly, or you may have thought about it very explicitly, and you'll just hear it in a different framework. Whichever way perspective you're coming from, the goal is for you just to have a new insight, something that will give you a new idea that you can take back and implement in your own life. And at some point, if you have a question or if you want to know how this becomes relevant, you have a specific situation, it doesn't have to be yours, it can be a client's. The goal here is to help you and help your clients through you. Please put it in the questions or raise your hand. The more I can know what you're thinking or what's coming up for you, the more I can tailor this experience and make sure that it stays relevant. So everything that you do as a business leader happens through conversations, whether they're the conversations you're having with yourself, that's most of your time, the conversations you're having with your team, the conversations you're having with your clients, and depending on the kind of business you have other stakeholders, you have vendors, and then there's always your family. And these conversations are the bridge between your reality and the other person's reality. These conversations are the way that you bring completely different perspectives and ways of seeing the world into one common experience. And we tend to have the language and the conversations that we've grown up with and our ways of responding to each other that we've grown up with. I bet there are things that you habitually just say, or it's easier to think of the people you know and the things that they habitually say. We all have these kinds of conversation moves. And we think that because we know language, we could just say anything because we just have to think it and we'll say it. But language first has to be developed receptively. So only when you've heard it and you've experienced it, do you now know how to put it together and put it out in new ways. And at some point, we need new models or new ideas to create new types of conversation moves. And we usually don't realize that these new conversation moves are available to us. So what I'm hoping today is that we'll be able to find that there's really an infinite potential to improve your leadership conversations, that wherever your conversations are now, they might be great. There's always still more. There's always still more potential for growing them. That's the game I play, is how much can I make happen more efficiently, more effectively, in more relational ways, more engagingly, in fewer words. Now, because I'm from New York, Jewish in New York, although I live in California, I'm still native there. I tend to still use a lot of words, but it's still the game I play to try and figure out which ones I can edit out and how to do it in less. I'm going to help recognize underlying challenges. What are the things that get in our way in our conversations? The different things that they're often paradoxes. They're not necessarily problems, but they're things that can make our conversations less effective or not as intentional as we want, and hopefully share with you some strategies, general principles. I'm not going to give really specific conversation moves, but if you have a question of like, well, how would that show up in this conversation? I'm really happy to give those examples. So I'm going to ask you to start by making a list of all the conversations you've just had in the last day. And if you haven't had a lot of conversations, you go back another day. And these count email conversations, text conversations. So just off the top of your head, talking about coffee in the morning with somebody, you had an email response to a client who had a complaint about something, you had a conversation with some colleagues, you're here. What are the conversations you've had in the last day or two? And just take a moment to do that. And I don't have music set up, so it's going to be eerily quiet for a moment. Oops. Okay. You have like a good list? I see some people still going. Thank you. Thank you for diving in and doing this. I'm going to move forward, but if you're still making a list of your conversations, that's okay too. Now take a look and see if you can categorize them. And ideally, I'd put you in breakout groups and we do this, but I don't think I'll actually have much time for presenting if we do that. And I think I have more to share. So if we stay here, I think that will help us move farther along. But I'd love to see some categories or some things that come up when you notice what kind of how many conversations you've actually had that move your business along. And I think there are different ways of categorizing them. You can see the ones that went well, the ones that didn't go well, the ones that made something happen, the ones that weren't about making anything happen. You could categorize them by relationships. You can categorize them by different topics in your life, in different contexts. There are a lot of different ways to categorize your conversations. So look and see what themes or categories seem to come up for you. And then if you wouldn't mind, put something in the chat that gives me some idea of where you are. And if you feel like, Leah, this is completely stupid and you're wasting my time, feel free to put that in the chat too. That's good information for me.
So Leah, you want us to put descriptors of our conversations?
Categories. What categories? If you were to look at all your conversations now, how would you categorize them? What kind of categories do you notice? The ones you have, there could be with whom you're having them. It could be by topics you're having them. It could be which ones went well, which ones didn't go well. Your categories, different people might think of different categories. If I were in a room with people and could hear and see what you were doing, I'd let that evolve. But I'm going to give it to you because we're doing this in a very frontal way. And then what kind of categories are showing up for you? Transactional. Thank you, Pierce, for that. Yes. Personal. Thank you. Empathy, listening, sales, negotiation. Those are great distinguishers. Family. Yeah. Thank you. So different categories that are showing up. Problem solving. Business with partner, clients, so the different kinds of people, educational, all the above, groups or individuals, another great way of categorizing them. Stressful or went well. Networking, exploratory, yeah. Sales. So I think we all have a lot of sales. We have a lot of collegiality, networking ones. That's why we're here. Things that go well, positive, negative. Technical help, transactional, staff meetings. Right? Team meetings. We have different people for whom you were speaking with. Thank you for putting all of these here, for looking through and seeing what kinds you're having in your life. And some of these conversations that you're having, we don't think of them because we're just listening to the chatter in our minds, but we are having conversations with ourselves on a regular basis. We are often not hearing all the words in those conversations. But the thing we tend to forget is that we are the listener of those conversations as much as we are also the speaker and the thinker in those conversations. Wow, jury, that sounds like a really interesting, different kind. Deliberation, though, is really, with jury members, really unique, yet something we all encounter in some ways or another. Catch up, client care, service reviews, operations reviews. Kevin, you've really been able to distinguish and discern the different types here: networking, mentoring, training, board meetings, financial reviews, many. Thank you, John. Attempting to move the relationship forward. So I am going to be addressing that. Personal dog walking. Thank you, Jonathan. Wow. So just to give an idea of, I'm going to save this. This is great because there's so many different kinds of conversations we need to be good at in our businesses. And I'm going to say that you wouldn't have a business if you were in an ACE already at one type of conversation, at least ones in which we lose temper. Thank you for that honesty there, yours. Yeah, we all have those, right? Where emotions get the better of us. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have expertise in one type of conversation, but just because you have expertise in one type of conversation doesn't mean that you have it in all conversations. And what I'm going to try and do is pull out what are the things that help us be successful in our conversations and make it easier for you to apply them in other contexts or to think of things in a new way that you can now apply to other conversations. So now let's play the what if game. Take one of those conversations that you think could have gone better. That doesn't mean that it went badly. It's just a conversation that could have an even better outcome. Just pick one that if it had a better outcome would have an impact for you. And we're going to play the what if game. What if, because we do this in our minds anyway, what if I go into this conversation, this person doesn't buy? What if I can't convince them to do this? What if they argue back with me? We're often playing the what if negatives in our minds. So you're already very good at this game. I'm just going to change the rules. Play the what if positive outcome that you don't even almost dare to imagine. What if this prospect just goes, whoa, oh my God, I can't wait to work with you? What if this person on your team goes, great idea. I need to go do that. Just go ahead and let your mind wander. Pick one conversation. What if it could really go better? What if? And then when you can imagine the better outcome, what if it could even be better than that? Or what if that conversation could lead to what's the next better outcome? Let your mind just play that positive outcome imagining game for a moment. It's fun if you let yourself go there, just like when you were a child with crayons. Let the imagination do something. Let it go. What if? What if? What if? And now the question is, who do you need to become to make that conversation happen? When you can picture that conversation, the one you know could change your business, the one you know could have double the impact that you're having now. And not because it's not good now, but because there's always an infinite potential to improve our conversations. What if who do you need to become to make that conversation happen? Let that question just sink in for a moment. Because it's never about what you're saying and how you say it. It's always about who you are being when you say it. It's not about what you say or how you say it. It's about who you're being when you say it. And I'm going to give you an example. I was 23, a New York City school teacher. I'm 5'1", and you can tell my voice is not the one that has the most kind of depth, natural authority to it. And it was even more Minnie Mouse when I was that young and tight and squeaky. And I have a perky energy. And I go into the classroom and I'm trying to get a group of 25, 26 first graders to sit down or to sit quietly or to focus on their work. And I say, okay, class, it's time to sit down.
Lunchtime is over.
Those are the words. Okay, class, it's time to sit down. How effective do you think that was? Can you picture the challenges I had as a New York City school teacher teaching the first time? And I was on the Upper West Side, so I had a mix of demographics in my class. It didn't work so well. Now I'm going to say those same words another way. Okay, class, it's time to sit down. Totally different response. Because now I'm being somebody completely different. This is the teacher who wants the children to, if you watch Abbott Elementary, the first episode especially was like, whoa, made me laugh and cry. It was so true. Really wanting to, I want the children to feel loved. I want to be liked. I more wanted them to feel loved. I want them to learn. I want them to feel safe here. I want to give. I want them to have all of that. This is who I was being. But that's not how it's going to get the attention. When I eventually was able to be a sub who could walk into a New York City's classroom and get the attention because I'm waiting for everyone's attention right now. Okay, class, it's time to sit down. Totally different way of being, of stepping into the authority and the vulnerability of being the leader in that classroom, which for me was a very vulnerable experience. We all have that range to shift our levels of being. And that journey's never done. It's the game I play is always, who can I be? Where can I be? Thank you. Thank you, David, for that addition. So who do you need to be to make that conversation happen?
Oh, sorry, Leah. I muted you by mistake.
Oops. Okay.
Sorry,
I'm back.
you're back.
Did I move forward 2 slides? It's going ahead too many slides. There we go.
There you go.
So now we're going to move a little more imagining so we can have the sense of being, because you take one of these conversations that you want to go better, and now think of someone who you admire. Think of someone, doesn't need to be real. This can be a fictional person, but imagine this character and imagine someone you admire and imagine them in the conversation. So sometimes I want to imagine a more compassionate kind of authority. So I like to channel one of Aaron Sorkin's president characters, whether it's Bartlett from The West Wing or the role that Michael Douglas plays in American President. There's a time when both of them stand there and give these very compelling speeches because they step into that level of authority and they speak from the heart at the same time. So think of who that might be for you, and imagine them in the conversation. And that usually can help you think of imagining a different outcome. When you allow it to play through somebody else, when you allow somebody else to step into that conversation through your imagination and see that conversation. And let me know in the chat, am I sounding crazy or are you with me? This is one of the things I do one-on-one with people, and I know who they are and I know it makes sense for them. It's different to start doing this with a whole group and not really know exactly how it's landing. So can you see it? Can you see somebody else in the conversation? Yeah, okay. I appreciate the nod heads. It's helping a little bit. And the good news is that if you can imagine it, that it's already in you. Thank you, Mina. I appreciate that. Yes, this is something you can take and do somewhere else. Sometimes it's hard. I would be the same way probably in a group place to do this for yourself. But if you can imagine it, it's already in you. And we really, really underestimate that most of the time because we think if we imagine it, it's something we desire and it's out there. But you wouldn't be able to imagine it, even if it's completely pretend, if it wasn't already part of you. Now think about 5-year-olds playing in the play area. Again, I go back to my teaching experience, but we're all just 5-year-olds who grew up bigger, but we still have that 5-year-old in the blocks. If we're allowed to play, we'll build, or housekeeping. When you take on another character, and part of what we're doing in with children play is processing this, seeing what it's like to take on the roles of the people they see around them. So let yourself have some kind of playful way of thinking about stepping into this other way of being, just being someone else. And again, now I tap to the theatrical experience. By becoming different characters, there are so many ways I realize it to experience the world. You can become another character. There's actually, I forgot the author's name, maybe somebody else here will know, the alter ego. And there's an author and a coach who specifically talks about alter ego and the power of using an alter ego. The well-known one, Sasha Fierce for Britney Spears. She uses Sasha Fierce if she's going on stage, but going to a conversation and taking on that alter ego, taking on that I'm going to be this other person. So this is the fundamental level in which we change our conversations, by changing our way of being. Beyonce, thank you. See, I remember the examples, but not so well. Patty, I figured you might be the one who would know it. Thank you. There we go. So I'm going to move us now to what does it mean in leadership? Well, to talk about leadership conversations and how this way of imagining our conversations, we have to have some idea of leadership. And I'm going to share with you my favorite definition. It comes from Francis Fry, who's a professor at Harvard Business School and writes in HBR, leadership at its core is about making other people better as a result of your presence and making sure that the impact lasts in your absence. And I love this. I can't say it too many times. I feel like I quote her all the time, yet I still have to read it every time. Such memory. Leadership at its core is about making other people better as a result of your presence and making sure the impact lasts in your absence. Now, I suspect that if you are here, that this is a common value. But we live in a world where until recently, our idea of leadership had to do with position and title, had to do with authority, had to do with command and control. So we still often have some of those assumptions playing somewhere within us, whether are these things we say to ourselves or whether it's in expectations we have of others or things the way we think others will expect of us. But this is the way we're going to move forward in thinking about leadership, because this is the approach to thinking about conversations that can become transformative. If you think about how to go into a conversation as a leader who's going to make an impact on others that leaves them better than they were before, because of your presence in your absence. So how do you want to make others better as a result of your presence in a way that lasts in your absence? What would it mean to you to be able to make others better? All of you have businesses or work in businesses because you want to help people. And if you're here in Collaberex, I'm going to guess that is already a shared value, that you're here to serve. So what is it that matters to you? Just think about that, write it down for yourself for a moment. That's an interesting point, Jonathan. Better as defined by them, not by you. Yeah, really wanting to them feel better and feel like they're better. It also can be that you have a view of better that they don't have yet. If they're on your team or someone who you're working with, so as a teacher, as a supervisor of other teachers, I often could see where the growth was, what it takes to own that classroom, especially since that was my journey, and know where I needed to help other people to get to a place where they're going to feel satisfied in the classroom with the work that they're doing, or they're going to feel that they can grow, but they might not always see the path or even know that that is their aspiration yet. So I think there's some of both in leadership, and your clients don't always know how they can be better. So you want to tap into helping them see a better version of themselves, but you're the one who knows what that better can look like and can tap into their imagination so they can start to see what that would be for them, for themselves along the way. I'm really appreciating people talking to me in the chat. Thank you. Thank you, David, for sharing. I want to give people advice that help them meet their financial goals. Sometimes I get paid for this, but it's more than the advice, right? The impact you want to make isn't that you gave advice. The impact that you want to make is that they took the advice and changed their lives. So it's really thinking about the impact on the other person, what makes them better than where they were before. And it's their perception of the result. Thank you, Jonathan. That's a great way of saying it. So moving along. So our goals, awareness of where there's infinite potential to grow leadership conversations. I hope, and you can share with me in the chat, you have some sense that there is always a potential to grow these leadership conversations. I'm definitely challenging myself, looking for places where I am not moving people as much into the conversations and the coaching experiences with me, and where I'm not moving them as much from coaching experiences into ongoing relationship that would really change their lives. And I'm looking at those conversations in particular right now in my life, but there's almost always a conversation. Sometimes it's the one with my teenager, sometimes it's the one with my husband. There's always some conversation where there's room to grow and make go a little smoother. And now we're going to look at some of these underlying challenges. I'm going to point out some paradoxes, and I think I move the slides around so they're not actually all in order. But the first one is the paradox of potential. I like thinking about paradoxes. You hear people say, especially coaches, you want to help you reach your fullest potential. You want to help you reach your highest potential. I was talking to a 12-year-old the other day who I just started some bar mitzvah tutoring with, and asked him what he wanted for himself and his goals. And he wants to reach his fullest potential. Well, where would your fullest potential be? Let's say it's a 10 out of 10. Where do you see yourself right now? He sees himself as a 4. This is really common what happens, because no matter where we move in our potential, the potential moves. So there's infinite potential. And if there's infinite potential, then as soon as we reach the top of one mountain peak, we're looking again at the next mountain peak. And how many of you know that experience of like, well, I got here. Oh yeah, but actually now I need to go over there. Now I got this far in my business time, but the thing I really need to work on is there. This is the gap. Daniel Sullivan, is that the right name? Talks about this as the gap, and book The Gap in the Game, which I highly recommend, of Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy co-wrote it with him. But the gap, we tend to live in this gap between where we are and where we see ourselves going, because we are always in the process of expansion. And when the process of expansion, just like our conversations have infinite potential, everything has potential around us. And so we're often looking at that next thing that we haven't gotten, that big problem that's in front of us looming. And that's one of the things that happens. And then our conversations come from this place. We are trying to fill the gap with our conversations. We're trying to get someone to move along to fill that gap with us. We are trying to get ourselves to fill that gap. This is one of the challenges and the paradoxes that we face. Another one I will call your stress pie. Because if you think about it, the stress that you carry, and stress isn't all bad. So that's one of the paradoxes. We need a certain amount of stress, because if we don't feel a certain amount of excitement and mix of chemicals in our body, we won't do anything. We won't care. So there's a good amount of stress, but then there's a certain amount where it becomes tension and becomes agonizing, or it becomes painful and becomes an obstruction. The thing is that most of the time, the main things that we're stressing about aren't that stressful. It's the thoughts around them that are stressful. So in this pie, these are the actual thoughts. So if you think of the biggest stressor on your mind right now, this is the thing. Doing a presentation in front of all the Collaberex people, a new one I've never done before on a new topic, venturing out a little different, emotionally exposing myself a little bit. All the thoughts that can come up around that, that's where I could really get stressed. Happen to be a pretty good manager of those thoughts, but you see the example of what I mean. My daughter getting a low grade on a test, math test score, how big a deal is one low score in one grade in one class in high school? Is it really going to change your life? But all the thoughts that come up around it. One thing that doesn't go well, the sale you don't get, all the thoughts that come up. I'm never going to do this. I'm not going to reach my goals. I can't. Am I really cut out for this? The kinds of doubts and self-questioning that come up. There's so many more thoughts around it, what we think people are going to say, how we think people are going to react. This is the paradox, that it's on the one hand, there is there. On the other hand, we create so much more of it. And that generates stories. We all have stories why things aren't working for us. And we start to live in these stories. We have stories about the economy, about the other people, about, well, my team doesn't get it, this person. Well, if things had only been different then, well, I can't just say this. And those stories are part of that pie. They're the things we're generating that don't actually have to do with what's noticeable, provable, that an alien would show up and see exactly. Well, they wouldn't be able to see if they don't have our same perception. That's a whole other thing. But let's go with the alien test, familiar to most people. Stress also focuses you. It helps you really focus on getting to the end of that tunnel. But on the other hand, it also narrows your perceptions. By narrowing your perceptions, it helps you focus on your goal, but it also leaves out other things you might see in the possibilities along the route. Now, you can't tell in the darkness of this tunnel where there might be side doors and other exits. And a lot of times in tunnels, and maybe that's just because I've spent a lot of time looking at the subways, there are doors and other exits. The safety paradox is that which we need to feel safe. We need to feel safe in order to express ourselves. We need to feel safe in order to venture out and make mistakes. But the people around us in conversations need to feel safe to do the same. So we have both the responsibility to create safety, but also to feel safe. And this is one of the places that influences and challenges our conversations. We stay within what's comfortable and safe for us to say. I call them conversation lanes. It's really uncomfortable to go up to someone you don't know and say, hey, you want to marry me? That would be completely switching conversation lanes. And that's not something I highly recommend. But there are times where we're holding ourselves back because the thing we actually need to do feels like that kind of conversation lane switching. And how do we create safety for ourselves and create safety for the other person to be able to step forward into the next level of conversation? So what can we do? Well, I like to say that it's never your fault, but it's always your responsibility. You have the wiring and the operational systems that you have, the social conditioning that you have, your language skills, your communication skills, your social skills, they are what they are. And none of how you got there is your fault. It's not about blaming. It's not about looking at the past and pointing fingers at something that went wrong or saying that you're doing anything wrong now. But there's always a chance to take responsibility for it and move forward. Find the resources around you, reflect for yourself, challenge yourself, and step up. So then that's the question. What level of responsibility are you ready to take for conversations to move into more levels of that infinite potential? What level of conversation are you ready to step into to go a little outside the comfort zone and see whether you can up level some of those conversations? And you might be saying, "No, Leah, thank you, not for me." That's okay too. It starts with the conversation with yourself. And you know those conversations because they're the ones you have in your head when you wake up. I have to do, I don't want to do that, but I have to do that, but I can't do that, but I don't want to do that. Anyone else have those kinds of circular conversations? You might have some better examples than I do. Most of the time when talk with people about difficult conversations they're having in their business or where they want to go next to create things through conversations, it starts with that conversation they're having with themselves. And that brings us to self-awareness. Self-awareness is one of the key tools that will help you when you have those conversations with yourself. Many of us don't take that time to sit and reflect and ask ourselves those questions. Journaling can be a good way to do that. Some of you may work with a coach is a good way to do that. Sometimes just finding a good partner. And Collaberex creates these environments where we sit and we reflect because our facilitators give us good questions to think about. And this helps build our self-awareness. The more self-awareness you have, the more you can start to change these things. Daniel Goldman in talking about leadership says that emotional intelligence is the primary driver. And it starts with self-awareness because the more self-awareness you have, the more you can self-manage. And then when you have that, you become aware of others as you're more aware of yourself, and as you're aware of others and you learn better how to manage them. And that's the process. So this is blue because it links to a document. I'm afraid if I press it, what will happen to the screen that I created? Let's see if it takes me there. Yeah, there we go. Leadership development checklist. This is full of conversations with yourself questions. And I'm happy to share the link in the chat for anyone who wants access to look at it. I just ask you to please make yourself your own copy. So you save it and then save it in your own drive. Now let's see, can I go back? That's what I did in practice. Press on the link. Let's see, I'll stop sharing for a moment and go in and fix that so that I can, yep, there I figured out how to do it. Here we go. And now I'm sharing my screen again with you. So we're here. So there's a document and reflection questions. I suspect that I'll be editing it as I think of different things. Right now, it represents a lot of the things that have come up in my work with clients and work with myself. And I hope you may find it effective, but taking time to stop and ask yourself and picking any one of those questions to build your self-awareness. And now I regularly once a week interview different people I call conversation aces about what gift for communication and improving these conversations they would give to other people. And I want to share with you what Fred Rockwell had to say. Fred is the CEO and co-founder of the Ascent Conference, which is a conference happening in New York. I'm actually going to go for C-suite leaders in SaaS companies. He also has another company that he's founded and is running.
Self-awareness. So I think everybody brings a ton to the table, and if everybody has self-awareness, then the puzzle will just come together after that.
Just to hear it from someone else. Okay, that one.
Self-awareness.
Oh, I don't want it to play again. Okay, it's my first time putting video in this. There we go. This is Francis Fry's model of how we build trust. Trust is the number one thing that will help you become an effective leader with others. And I think we all know a certain amount of this. I found her trust triangle really helpful and thought I would share it with you. We hear about being authentic. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. We know about being empathy. And the other part is really knowing that we know what we're doing, that people can trust our judgment, that we know where we're going and that we're leading things forward. These are the three corners of building trust, which is the foundation of the relationships. And the more trust you have in the relationship, the more you can bring it along. Now, conversations are really relationships. Conversations are really a dance of relationship that's happening. And so in the conversation, the more you can accumulate trust, or the more you have already accumulated trust because you have entered social capital into the bank of that relationship. You've given things that people start to trust you. You've given value. You've helped them feel seen, heard, understood, validated. The more you have those things, the more they are going to trust what you have to say and continue with that. Empathy. This is David Siegel, who is the CEO of Meetup. And I asked him at the end of all my interviews, I asked these leaders what they would gift to others to help them with their conversations.
And if someone does something or says something, or, that you might be upset by or frustrated by, it's really important just to take the step back and empathize and understand where they're coming from, why they did what they did. They're not doing it maliciously. Maybe 1% of the time, 99% of the time, people are not doing something maliciously. They're doing something because they care about the company and they care about their teams. And I think if you could think about what a person is going through as if you were kind of going through it, one would be a much more thoughtful listener and conversationalist.
That sounds obvious, yet we can all hear it again and again, I think, right? So showing empathy. He gave us a great example of it, dropping the mask. So people sometimes ask me about authenticity, and sometimes I talk to people who struggle with, what does this mean? And I think we all have some sense of it, but we tend to put masks on. We tend to want to hide certain parts of ourselves. And we hide the parts of ourselves that we're embarrassed by, or the parts of ourselves that we don't want people to see. Yet, I have yet to find when that thing we want to hide isn't also the seed of our power. I think of it like Aladdin's lamp. That thing you're most ashamed about or embarrassed about, you tend to stuff deep inside. So for me, it would be showing how much I cared. I recognize people, I remember them, I care about them, I think about them when they're not there. And I thought this was the most embarrassing thing about me. I didn't want to let people know how much I knew who they were, they cared, especially when I was a teenager, right? But then, I became a teacher. So think about that. That's actually like an asset, right? But I would take it, stuff it in, put it in the lamp, and stick it in the darkest corner of the darkest part of the cave, farther away where nobody can get it. But when you take that out and you rub it gently and you nurture and you give that thing that you feel uncomfortable around, what pops out is this all-powerful genie. Because it's the same thing that you feel you most hide, whatever you feel your unworthiness is, wherever you feel something's not good enough. The flip side of that thing that you care about it enough that you're thinking about it, embarrassed by it, is actually the seed of your power. And this I see over and over and over again. So the more we can start to allow our full integrated self to show up, the more people trust us, the less we have a role or playing or something we're trying to show or something we're trying to prove, the more people trust us. A great example was my daughter in 4th grade. She had a teacher who was lovely, but that teacher had a clear boundary. She didn't talk about herself. She didn't talk about her family, and she never showed what she was actually feeling. Everything she did was outward for the children. And for my daughter, who needs to feel genuine trust and safety with somebody, this was really hard to under, because she just didn't know. I don't know what she's thinking. I don't know what she's feeling. It was a very exaggerated version of something almost all of us do. Well, that seems fake. She still has an incredible, genuine radar. The nurse comes in and goes, okay, we're going to take care of you now. And how's this? She's like, oh my God, I hate her, is her immediate response. We all know some version of that. We are all sensitive to it in different ways. And the more we allow an integrated version of ourselves to show up, the more powerful we are. And this leads us to what I call the vulnerability paradox. And to do the things that feel uncomfortable, we're going to feel vulnerable. To step into these parts of ourselves that we don't really admire, we're going to feel vulnerable. And vulnerable makes us feel weak. And so we sidestep that discomfort, and we don't want to let other people see it because we feel like this kitten in the box. We feel this part of ourselves, that 5-year-old again, that's still always there. Yet, again and again, I've seen, and I learned this through my theatrical career, that you step into the vulnerability when people see strength. And I learned that because it's really hard to get into a scene and to let real, honest, true emotion show and show your real reactions. For me, that was the hardest thing, but yet I craved wanting to do it so much. And getting up in front of people and letting those things show, whoa, that is not the kind of person I am. I like to keep things to myself. Thank you very much. But there was something in me that wanted it enough that I did it again and again. And what I saw from watching other people in class and for myself was the more I stepped into the vulnerability itself, the more people saw the character, the less they saw how I actually felt letting things show up. And if you think about that way, If you think about your favorite movies, those actors are letting themselves go through the vulnerability of exposure, of some kind of emotional exposure. But you don't see that. You see the character. And when we step into vulnerability with strength and with courage, what people see is the strength and the courage. And I'll give you an example. I was doing a workshop for some low income women who all had experienced HIV. And I had them come up with a very clear message they had for someone in their life that they'd never been able to say. And this one woman, I had them look at somebody who really created presence and trust and receptivity for them. And this one woman looks at the facilitator, who was really good at creating that for her, and says, "Why did you let him molest me?" And immediately afterwards, the whole room just goes silent. And I asked her, "Well, what was that like?" "Oh my God, I feel weak. I feel my stomach hurting." Ask every other person in the room what they saw: strength, courage. That's the vulnerability paradox. The same thing that we hide that makes us feel vulnerable is the thing that makes us strong, and telling our stories. And we know that because we tell stories in Collaberex. So when we tell a story about something we overcame, it may feel vulnerable. We don't want to go back there. But it's when we tell the story how we overcame it that somebody else hears our strength. That one came up because we just did that last week. When we step into our vulnerability, we show up as the lion. We may feel like this on the inside, but we show up like this, quite the leader on the outside. Here's another one of those clips.
Give yourself permission.
In just a minute, Joe is the president of Reach University, which is actually doing amazing things. And if you want to learn more, see more of the video, you can see it on my LinkedIn page.
To show, not tell, by looking for and sharing the human stories first. If you stop and tell just one story of a human being experiencing what you do, experiencing the vision that you're trying to bring about, suddenly it becomes real, right? It becomes real and it becomes exciting. So approach the way you change people's minds by starting with the stories that will change their hearts.
No, there's real vulnerability, even in him just coming forward and saying all
Give
that.
yourself
Whoops.
permission to
Trying to go to the next slide. When we tell the stories, when we speak from the heart, is when we can start to spell out the vision. This is vulnerable. The listening paradox is that we want to feel heard. So we tend to like talking to people who make us feel safe. Again, the safety paradox, but who listen well to us and who let us speak comfortably. But the thing about leadership is we have to be the ones who create that space. So the trick about being the teacher is I would like to go into a classroom where the children are sitting and respectful and say, "What are we going to learn today?" But that's never going to happen. I have to create that space. And if I create that space, then the children will come to me with their questions. Then the children will come to me with their challenges. Then they will say, "What else do we get to learn?" But I have to start as the leader. I have to be the listener first. Yet I want to really be heard. To be heard, you have to start with listening. And that's the next paradox. We have a hard time sometimes tapping into the listening, especially when we have something we know we feel like we need to express. So here are some strategies. Get curious and investigate both what's going on for you and what's going on for the other people in the conversation. We tend to go into conversations knowing where we want them to go, what the outcome to be. Slowing down and getting curious in the moment in the conversation opens up a lot of possibility, but I'm going to warn you, it can feel vulnerable because you're less certain about what you're going to say. You're not going into thinking about what's coming next. You're allowing yourself to be slowed down just in what's going on without a plan. And that can be scary. That can feel vulnerable. It can feel less safe. You can be not sure about how things are going to be heard. But this is a powerful tool in conversations. And you already do it somewhere. I'm sure you already do it. Ask better questions. There's no end. This is where infinite potential in conversations really can live, is inside the question. What question will tap into that person's imagination? What story can you elicit from someone that will help them to start understanding things? What's the question you ask? So when I was struggling in those years of being a new city school teacher, my second year especially was even harder. And for reasons that would take, I'm not going to tell that story, but it was really hard. And there was a professional developer who was working with her, and she was amazing because she never made me feel bad. She didn't make me feel like I wasn't doing a good job. I already felt enough of that myself. She always listened, and she always gave me the just right tool that I needed. I said, how do you know to do that? She says, well, once I know what question to ask, then I listen. Every teacher already knows the answer. They already know, and the answer will be in what they say. The more I do this, and I feel like there's still room and more room to grow as a coach, as a leader, and ask the right question and then listen, the more the answer presents itself in how the other person's speaking, the more attuned I am to where they're coming from, what I can say that's the just right thing for them. It's the art of the question, but then it's that paradox of listening, that we have great ideas, we want to express ourselves, we want to move the conversation forward, but the power still lies in letting people know that they're really heard and that they have the freedom to speak. And here's the guide. Here's where your expertise matters. We think of sometimes leadership as trying to be the control, make things happen, move things forward. But if you imagine yourself as the guide, it means you know the path, you know the way, you have the expertise, you have the plan. And you have that, and you're helping other people follow it along. You're giving them directions along the way. This orientation towards thinking of yourself as the guide, and I would suggest if you're a parent that this can be a very helpful, maybe already doing it, already helpful thing in terms of parenting, thinking about the guide. You don't have to be the fixer. You don't have to be the one who has the solutions. You don't have to be the one who knows everything. You just have to know how to be the guide. But you do need to know where you're going. You do need to have a plan. And that's where the trust will come. That's that logic side of that trust triangle. When you show up for people as their best audience, they trust you. They believe you. Think about being their audience. And I do this just intentionally with the spotlight because we often have the spotlight on us. How am I doing? Are they listening to me? Do they trust me? Do they care about what I have to say? But the more we can put that spotlight on the other person, the more we can hear them and listen and get curious about them, the more effective we are in our leadership. And it's counterintuitive because we think leadership is doing and saying and making happen. But being someone's best audience is the best way to build your influence. And showing up as the support. My daughter's choir teacher is amazing at this. He sets the bar really high, and then he gives them support to reach it. So when we just tell people, no, you have to do better. This has to get better. You have to make it done that way. That can create anxiety because if they don't know how, get the A, do better in school, study harder. This doesn't help anybody know how to do anything better. And we do that to ourselves all the time, right? We do that to the people around us. The more you do it to yourself, the more likely you do it to the people around you too. And if you do it to the people around you, I guess you're doing it to yourself. But the more you can be the support and people see you as the support to help them realize their goals, their aspirations, which are usually doing well in whatever it is that they're doing, the more they also will trust you, the more what you have to say will matter. And if we think about leadership and our leadership conversations as an opportunity to elevate others, this opens new possibilities. We often think about how to get something done, but how do we do it in a way that also helps lift them up? Sometimes it's just sharing appreciation. Sometimes it's just acknowledging their contribution to the fact that we got something done. But there's always a little opportunity to elevate others in those conversations. And this is the last part. I think it's one of the hardest ones. Imagine going to a restaurant and ordering what you don't want. This is kind of how we live a lot of our lives. Here's what I don't want. I don't want to argue anymore. I don't want friction. I don't want my client to protest. I don't want to lose the sale. I know what I don't want. And we tend to fill our minds with the thoughts of what we don't want. The what ifs go into what if this happens? That's what we don't want. What we don't always know how to do is get really clear on what we want and then know how to ask for it. Then you'll go to one of the experts in the room and say, I want to get clear on my sales. I want to know what's happening inside this conversation, why I'm losing my client. I want my client to listen to me more the first time. Know what you want. I know how to get really clear about what you want and ask for it. And once you know how to ask and formulate the question of what you want, the answer starts to appear. Even just listening to yourself ask the question taps into something happening in your brain circuitry and allow your intuition and answers start to bubble up. And the answers are often there, but you have to know what it is you want and you have to be willing to ask for it. You can't get something you don't ask for. Imagine going up to the McDonald's windows and saying, I don't want a shake, I don't want fries, and I don't want a hamburger. It doesn't work. You also can't order your coffee that way. You have to, it's the same. The difference is that if you are working in a restaurant, the context is already set up for you where the server wants to accommodate you and do well for you because that's how they run their business. But when you're the leader, you create the context in which the client, the vendors, the partners, the family members are the ones who want to give you what you want because you've asked for it, because that's the relationship you've created by using your infinite potential inside your leadership conversations. And the last thing I'll end with is that I love this quote because stepping out of our comfort zone, up-leveling our conversations, moving into different conversation lanes, trying new conversation moves always requires a certain amount of faith. But faith and fear both demand that you believe in something you can't see. You just get to choose the faith or the fear. Which what if are you going to go with? So now looking back at that conversation that you picked early on, what new ideas do you have to bring to that conversation? What, if anything, was possible? Which of these insights or strategies might you use in your conversations? And I'm going to close there. And here's my information. If anyone wants to reach out. So I don't think I put the link to that reflection tool in the chat. And this is my LinkedIn where I share content regularly. I also have a guide on how to influence others and grow meaningful connections that has some of this in there in a nice, easy to read, remindable way, if that feels like it would be of use to anyone. But the thing I'd really love to ask of you, I'm getting really clear on my request, is to be in touch. Send me a text or an email. What resonated for you from this? What questions came up for you? Both because it will help me, and two, it will help us start a conversation. And I love conversations that are meaningful, conversations that help others. I don't have to know where they're going. I just get curious and explore. If I can support you in these conversations in any kind of way, please feel free to reach out. I promise that I will not sell you. I will really be interested and want to help you as much as I can and just invite you into other steps. So,
Leah, I will share with you, the people that participated today. So you can send them, any documents that you want to send them that supports everything that you presented today. And if anyone wants to, Leah, I had asked her before we started whether she can hang out for a few minutes. If anyone has some specific, maybe difficult conversations that they want some feedback on, or things that didn't go as well as they had hoped it would, Leah would be happy to add her insight to a particular situation. And so I'm going to hang out also.
Thank you. And I really do appreciate the feedback in the chat. The more specific you can tell me of how it might have impacted you, what you might do with it, or what wasn't helpful or where it got boring, feel free. All that is helpful information because this was, like I said, a new presentation the first time I was doing it. I think that's part of what Collaberex is here, the safe environment to do new things.
Yes. That's we're the test balloon. So
Something
it's
I've been wanting to create. So I appreciate any of the feedback and thoughts, and I would be happy to answer questions or specific situations.
Right. If you have something, just unmute and we can have a kind of a more intimate conversation here. And, if anyone wants to bring up something or a concern or a conversation that didn't go as well. So I'll make a comment on kind of the theme that I viewed from here, that it's all from within. It's within your, leadership is within your control. It's all things that you can do, that you can be, how you show up. And people sometimes think of leadership as, well, I did the right things, I took the right actions. But it's an internal process.
It definitely is. Leadership is about action. It's about decisions. So there's things that leaders have to face, but it is a lot about the internal game you're playing. That's what comes up again and again when I interview different leaders in different situations. And when I work with leaders, it's the internal game.
Yeah. Does anyone have any comments on this or particular conversation they've been having that has been challenging? We all have every day, I think, either with ourselves or with others, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one that I have on the top of my mind is actually more the divorced parent I wrote in my newsletter the other day. I was talking to a man who is divorced from his wife, and he talks to his son, who's a young teenager, and this discovers that his son sees black spots and sometimes feels like he can only see as if he can only see through his pupils. And he's like, well, how long has this been going on? 4 or 5 years. What? Ah, that's where he wants to go, but he can't, right? It's like very emotionally triggering. And then he says, well, does your mother know about this? Yes. And she has a doctor appointment for December. December. He's like, what? And now he has to figure out how to talk to his wife without getting her on the defensive, without putting her on the attack and escalating conflict about his concerns for his son and wanting to have something happen with the doctor sooner. And I think that this kind of conversation is something that happens, fairly regularly, where we are tiptoeing around explosive situations because we don't know how to have those conversations.
Yeah.
That
mean-
I gave more tactical advice for that. And in my
Yeah.
newsletter, I have it's a little bit more tactical. Oh, thank you, Claudette. I'll go back and look for those.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a vendor about a week ago that did not go well. It was someone I wanted to hire that I loved that gave me a proposal, and I felt they really got what I was doing and could service my needs, and everything aligned, and it was great. And she sent me the contract and I signed it. I made the first payment, and then she changed the terms. She said, well, I can't really start for 3 weeks. And I said, but you knew this was important to me, that we need to start right away. And I don't think I had the good conversation. I didn't react well. I reacted was, you broke a promise, and I'm afraid you're going to break other promises. And can you compromise? When something happened, and I think if I had exhibited more empathy, and I want to work with her, because what changed? If my approach had been that, then maybe the result wouldn't have been different, but it would have given the possibility that it could have been
Right.
different.
That's a really great example, Jonathan. Thank you for sharing that, because in the moment, the problem is that she feels that she has a commitment and she's trying to shift, right, the terms of the conversation. And the reaction comes from, well, wait, I trusted you, but wait, this is different than what we agreed on. Well, what does this mean in terms of all the future? All these other things show up. Whereas if you can bring the conversation into, okay, so what you're saying is this is the agreement we made, and you can turn a question. So are you shifting the terms of our agreement? Should we reopen our contract? Do we need to relook at this, or start from that place of empathy and really listen? And always that's a good place to start. That's what I told the dad as well. Well, he already had gone through certain things, but in that situation, start with listening to the mom. He told you he can't see. What were you thinking when that came up? Well, thank you for making that doctor's appointment. Sets a whole different tone for the conversation than, what the hell? You're waiting till December? Which is where we tend to start.
Yeah. And so in my situation, I went with, should I not trust you anymore? Instead of, and her reaction was probably, you're calling me untrustworthy? So
Right.
it wasn't the direction that, if I wanted to mend and find some middle ground,
Right.
that wasn't the way to go.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I got exactly that result. She said, I don't think this is going to work out. So
Well, someone who you feel didn't go through with an agreement, maybe someone wasn't the right match for you. Anyway,
yeah.
sometimes that's the hard part, is letting go of something, is accepting the loss inside the conversation
Yeah.
of the relationship.
Okay.
So too.
Does anyone have any other
Thank you, Claudette. I appreciate that. I hope there was some helpful feedback. I feel like in some ways, if I'm doing this for Collaberex, I'm preaching to the choir, people who already care about leadership, already paying attention to some of these things. Um, but I'm hoping to do it in a way that creates insight. I hope there was some insight, some new ideas that came up in terms of who you might be or how you might show in the way that Jonathan just told us. Instead of
Yeah.
going forward.
Leah, I'll just give one piece of, I guess, input. I don't know, this isn't, it was a great
Yeah, thank you,
presentation,
Dan.
but, great presentation, but just one piece of input, because I've heard similar messaging. You have to bring your whole self to work. You have to be genuine. You have to
Right, right.
to let people know, how you feel, who you are, all that. And it's good advice, and it can be a challenge for those of us who work in more of a consulting kind of capacity, where our clients don't necessarily expect that, at least not very much of that. So it can be, sometimes we have to like kind of have a balance of how much of that we're going to bring. You're getting paid by the hour. They don't want you just
Yeah.
talking about your weekend, you know?
Yeah, so
Um,
that's a really great example. So I think there's two things in there. One is that bringing your whole self doesn't mean you actually have to talk about the other parts of yourself.
Hmm.
And I think that can be a place where that assumption gets mixed up. And
Hmm.
two is that we're operating inside a culture that's not going to accept you as your whole self. And those are two different things. So allowing yourself to be your whole self is more of how you're showing up, not necessarily what you're saying. So I could show up here and I'm like, I'm just going to share with you the knowledgeable presenter part of me and the part that thinks and the part that knows. And see, now I'm a little more distant from you. You're not seeing my whole self because I have this presentational version of me that I'm now giving you. And if I talk about my weekend, I haven't shared any more of myself. You don't see any more of who I am because I'm just talking to you from this other place outside of myself, as opposed to dropping into my body, connecting within myself, and sharing from this place that you can sense has more authenticity to it. Does that make sense?
Yep. Well, thank you for the presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you,
thank you. And
Dan.
thank you for that. That's a really good thing for me to try and think about, that we talk about authenticity and what it means. And it can be challenging in certain environments, but it also can be challenging because we think it means having to talk about certain things that no one wants to hear.
Can I
And
can
that's
I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
Kimberly, you're a great example of this. Kimberly works at a bank. What is more, where the culture is not about, really personal things, but you do a great job of that balance. You come across as your authentic self. You find out what you have in common with clients. You create emotional, personal connections with people while still being the banker. So
Thank you. It can feel like a fine line to walk at times, but I really appreciate you saying that, Jonathan. Thank you.
yeah.
It's a great example. I'm thinking back to some of the consulting. So I've done some talking about difficult conversations with people who do auditing, and they're often coming into a situation that feels very threatening. People don't want to know what's going on in their books. They don't want to know what they did wrong. They don't want to know where their systems and operations are not happening. And it's that fear of judgment. Often what you're doing when talking about being your more of yourself or authenticity is that you're taking away that people think you might in the back of your mind be judging them. That I'm here and I see this is what's going on and I'm here to support you. But letting them know what your cards are, because otherwise they're trying to guess what cards are you hiding, and they don't trust the cards that you're hiding. And showing up with authenticity in that ways. And I think it's a really overused words in that way. So it's more about genuine communication, and it's about allowing people to see that you're safe, allowing people to see that you're not holding anything back. You're not judging them from behind a curtain. That's what will make them feel safer. And that's hard because often we are really judging people from behind the curtain. So how do you handle that? That's the curiosity, and you can't judge if you're being curious. So if you get more curious, the harder it is to judge people. If you get curious in the moment, the judgment will start to take a second seat.
Yeah. Well, Leah, thank you for this was great. I mean, I found
Thank
it really engaging and insightful, and I really appreciate your sharing with us. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone that's still here, and for everyone that showed up before. So everyone
Thank you.
have a really great afternoon, and I will and connect with Leah, and if you have any other questions for her or me, we're here for you. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
both. Jonathan, I'll
Okay.
see you Saturday.
Yep,
All right.
good. Okay,
right,
I'm going to
take care.
stop the recording.